welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of an absolutely gorgeous novel. It was a beautiful and emotional read, and I really loved the experience of reading it so much, and I am so excited to talk about it. So, welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Sure, it's Edward Hamlin. Thanks for having me. The book is Sonata in Wax. It's a combination of a historical novel and a contemporary novel. It's two timelines that kind of braid together. And the root of it, as we'll probably talk about, is a musical mystery.
It is such an intriguing musical mystery, and I really love um, where the mystery overlaps with real points in history and real figures, families from history that I know you are connected to.
Mhm.
I'm already getting so ahead of myself. So before we get into all of that, could we talk a little bit about your career in general and your other writing?
Sure. Well, I didn't really start publishing much until I was probably in my early 50s, late 40s, early 50s. And I had a whole career before that and overlapping into that in human services, kind of trying to create and disseminate new technology for social workers, large agencies, small agencies, everything in between. Spent about the last 10 years doing just child welfare work and was always writing fiction along the way to varying degrees as work would permit. But sort of in my late 40s, early 50s, started making a new push, I guess, to get some short stories out there and did that, had some good luck with that. And I published a short story collection in 2015 called Night in Erg Chebby and Other Stories, which came about through winning the Iowa Short Fiction Award. And that was a great boost and a thrill and a great validation, as you might expect. So I've written lots of novels over the years. This is the first one that's actually, seen print. But it's been a really wonderful experience.
So, what was the inception point for this novel? Was it a particular character, a time, a theme you wanted to explore, or just a vibe? Where did it all begin for you?
Well, all of that. I suppose there were a couple of different curiosities I had, or kind of, I will not say obsessions, but strong interests I had. One was a particular uh, magical period of classical music, and particularly classical piano music, right around the turn of the century, 20th century, and in particular French composers like Satie and Ravel and Fauré. And there's just this amazing kind of concentration of just composers thinking way outside the box and doing really interesting things. And I really love that music for as long as I can remember. So I kind of wanted an excuse to delve deeper into that. And so that was one thread. Another thread was I'm also a musician. I actually have a CD coming out a month after the paperback of Sonata in Wax, kind of crazy timing. But that took me through the process of learning some engineering skills over the years. And so I've had a home studio for years and years, and I've learned, a bit about how to record music and do the engineering part. And so I was kind of really intrigued with all that. And this novel was a wonderful way for me to, geek out on all that and have fun with some of the things I'd learned. And then I suppose the third big stream was, as you alluded to, my own family, who were eccentric uh, Bostonians. This is on my dad's side, and had what I think of as a really interesting and kind of classic American arc of growing up in a kind of provincial world in Maine originally, And then my great great grandfather was the co-founder of Chase and Sanborn Coffee, which became a great American brand, and now is not not so great. Now I think they're owned by an Italian company. But the family kind of became pretty wealthy. They became Boston Brahmins in the late 19th century. And then they lost it all. I didn't see any of it, but I love coffee. That's about the main thing that I inherited from all that background. But a lot of coffee went into the making of this novel. But that whole arc of kind of coming out of a provincial background, building kind of a great American brand in the second half of the 19th century, and then seeing the next generation kind of lose it all, squander it all, that's just red meat to any writer. So I really have wanted to write that story for a long, long time. And I grew up with some of the artifacts from the family. And in fact, you've read the book, so you know that some of the action occurs in their old mansion, which is now a cultural center in Winchester, Massachusetts. And when my mother moved out close to us, she donated a lot of these Sanborn artifacts to that house. So now they're kind of back where they started. So anyway, I'm digressing a lot, but that was another really important part of the process for me.
Mm. That is such an interesting combination of incepting ideas, and the way that they are all blended together here is so beautiful. Let's start with Ben, one of our protagonists in one of our timelines. I'd love if you could talk a little bit about, maybe where he is in life at the beginning of the novel and shaping his character and the choices that he makes, because some of them are interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he's sort of a world-class classical music producer. He's kind of the go-to guy for everybody from, Daniel Barenboim to my fictional diva, Ana Clara Mata, who's a very melodramatic, a very talented Brazilian pianist who will only record with Ben at his studio Counterpoint in Chicago. And so Ben has built this reputation as just the gold standard of producing classical music. And he's about 54 when we meet him. He's recently divorced. His wife has left him for someone he just thinks is unbelievably inappropriate for her. He can't understand why in the world his marriage imploded over this guy. And so he's kind of reeling from that. He's also facing a medical situation that I won't spoil, that is just kind of a bump under the rug that's becoming more and more dramatic, and he has to deal with that. It could affect his livelihood and his career, among other things. And so we meet him when he's at a really down moment of his life. He's really struggling to pick himself up after this divorce and to deal with this medical situation that he's just been kind of trying to ignore. And into his life drops these five wax cylinders, which contain in five parts this mysterious sonata that knocks him flat with its originality.
Mm. That brings me to one of the questions I've been the most excited to ask, which is approaching writing about music, which has been compared to, I forget who said it. I think it's been attributed to a lot of people, but there's that phrase that writing about music is like dancing about architecture.
I love it. That's true.
It is. So I'm curious, like, what is your approach to portraying music on the page? How tangible is the music in your head, and what do you do to translate it onto the page?
Yeah, those are all good questions. I wish I had clear answers for them. I completely agree with the sense of that quotation. It is challenging because I think music and writing are sort of totally different sides of our brain, you know, and that's part of the fun of them. And it's true in my own life in that I've long been, I mean, I've played guitar for 51 years. I just figured out that's kind of a frightening number. But I've composed music for a long, long time. And I've written fiction for a long, long time. And those two passions were always in a really nice balance with each other. But when it came down to actually sitting down and writing about music, I had to straddle the two. And it is tricky. I've always been a sort of sensory writer. It's really important to me to touch on all five senses, sometimes on every page. And so, in that sense, this is obviously focusing on the hearing sense. And I had a lot of experience writing about that and thinking about how to write about that, just not in the case of music. And so I think where I connected it was as a composer, I've always found it useful to capitalize on mistakes. So if I'm just sort of improvising or playing around and I play a stray note that happens to be out of key, I've learned over the years that maybe that's an interesting thing to pursue, you know. And so I'll sort of say, well, maybe that'll lead me into a different key. Maybe that'll lead me into some other idea that's kind of more interesting than what I was doing. And I think my writing process has always been very similar to that. So I get kind of intrigued maybe by some visual detail, or in the case of this book, some musical detail, and I just follow it. And I kind of trust myself to follow it to somewhere interesting, or at least to know when it's a dead end pretty quickly, so I'm not wasting my time with it. And I think in this book, the best example of that is the Lily Boulanger subplot, which you will remember. Other, listeners who haven't read the book, it won't make any sense at all, but hopefully they will read it, and it will. But along the way, Ben hears this piece of music by an underappreciated French composer from the turn of the century, Lily Boulanger. Her big sister, Nadia Boulanger, is much better known. She was the composition teacher for a lot of great American composers. And anyway, Lily had a very short career. She died young of what we would now think is probably Crohn's disease. She was only 24, but she did produce some really special music. And at some point, my character Ben hears a little snippet of this music, a piece of hers, and identifies a particular descending pattern, a particular descending melodic pattern that connects with a pattern that he recognizes from the mysterious sonata. And that's kind of a lead for him. And the whole Lily subplot really just came out of research I was doing, and I stumbled across her, and I was intrigued by her tragic story in terms of, an incredible genius cut short. And I never, that was never a conscious sort of thread in the book, but I took it and I ran with it, and there we are. So, kind of writing about that descending figure, I spent a lot of time listening to recordings of that piece. There are about 6 or 7 really talented pianists who've covered that Lily piece. And, then trying to write about how kind of that made me feel emotionally listening to that, because it is a very dark piece. And yet there are little tantalizing hints in it where it suddenly goes from minor to major, and you sort of think you're safe. And then she pulls the rug out from under you and keeps descending into minor. So I guess, for me, I was able to write about the emotional experience of listening to that piece. And that's, it's an entry point. That's what I would say.
That's so interesting. And I think that does harken on something that I really like about it is that I think something very special that art can do is like teach you how to appreciate it, And so one of the things I think that you get from this book by writing about music is that there's like some lessons about music appreciation or music or how to listen to it, that are sort of hidden away in there. Like, because that note in particular, I think is just something that's going to stay with me. And I think that like, I'll be able to identify some of those like motifs and things going forward. So that's really interesting.
I'm really glad to hear that. I mean, I'm not a classical music guru by any means. I'm like woefully ignorant, but I know what I like. And I mean, it's been fun to put this book out in the world and have people who are classical music gurus and nerds come back to me and teach me things. I've had actually two occasions where someone who is a professional concert pianist, actually three, I'm sorry, three occasions, someone who's a professional pianist has read the book or popped up in the back of a book event, not having yet read the book, and just gotten all excited about it. And then I've had sort of follow-up conversations with them and hopefully not gotten anything too terribly wrong. But to kind of hear a professional musician, particularly some that specialize in this music, react to the book and hear about, hear their take on it has been really fun. And I've learned a lot. I mean, I've learned things. I actually had one book event here in the Denver area where a woman showed up early, was sitting in the front row. She was the first person there. And as I was kind of getting set up, she ran up with a piece of sheet music, and it was that Lily Boulanger piece. And she said, I've been a professional pianist for 50 years, and I've played this piece so many times. I read the first half of your book. I couldn't believe it. And I had to come and meet you and bring you the sheet music. Would you sign it?
My gosh.
It was pretty funny.
That's amazing. It's a really interesting, just the unexpected ways that books can, it's going to sound very trite, but that books can bring people together, or that parts of something that you write can connect with people in ways that you just couldn't possibly
Yeah.
predict.
Oh, yeah. That's that. I mean, that's half the fun of it for me, for sure.
Yeah. So let's talk about the other timeline. It's 100 years previous to the one that we've been discussing. I'd love to hear a little bit about Elizabeth for our audience and your approach to intertwining the timelines. Do you write them separately and then weave them together, or are they written in dialogue? How do you structure?
Yeah, so the book has this alternating structure where you're in the Chicago timeline for about, 20 or 30 pages. And then we go to the Boston turn of the century timeline, which also has some little side trips to France. And then we go back. So we alternate back and forth. And I wrote them pretty sequentially. I kind of had to map out where the story was going, both of those two stories. And there's a lot of complex interplay because some of the characters in the old timeline have some of the information that the reader needs to solve the mystery. Some of the characters in the contemporary timeline have other pieces of information. And I had to kind of, bring it all together. So it was necessary to kind of write them in pretty close synchronization. Um, I debated how long each of those sections should be because I don't personally much like books where there's too fast of an alternation. If it's 5 pages here and then 5 pages switching back and forth, I get whiplash. On the other hand, there's the reality that if you digress for too many pages, the reader is going to lose their place and not remember where in the world you left them in the other timeline. And so I experimented with different things there, and I hope it worked. Uh, but it took a little bit of experimentation to get that balance.
Mm. So, Elizabeth encounters the family that we mentioned previously, the Sanborn family. Um, could you talk a little bit about drawing on their history? You've mentioned your relation to them. Was there additional research that you did in sort of crafting their representation? And was there anything that you learned in that research that changed things for you, changed your image or your idea of them?
Yeah, tons. The last part is easy to answer. I've learned so much. And one of the reasons that I learned so much is I was really fortunate to connect early on with a woman named Ellen Knight, who is a professional historian She's the town archivist and historian for Winchester, where the Sanborns were from. And she, it turned out, is also a historian of early classical music scene in Boston, early 20th century, which is exactly the milieu of the story.
No.
So she became just an invaluable ally, and I almost want to say partner in writing the book. And she really, brought me material about my own family, my own ancestors, the Sanborns, that I had no idea about. In fact, yesterday, as recently as yesterday, a year and a half out from publication, she sent me an email with a photo she had just found of my great-great-grandmother in a gigantic hat, attending in costume a Gilded Age party in 1932. So it's been just great. And the other half of that is the house, the Sanborn house, which, as I mentioned, still exists, courtesy of the Winchester Historical Society, who saved it from the wrecking ball. And I've been there 3 times now. The last time was for a book event for this book, which we did in the music room of the Sanborn Mansion, where the mysterious sonata was recorded, according to my story. It was pretty fantastic. And so that house really, made concrete a lot of, this information about the family and the life that they lived. And Ellen, actually during COVID, Ellen went there when the house was closed and took photographs and researched, and we had to figure out, I can't say it without giving spoilers, but she had to figure out how certain things laid out in the house and how I would map the story to that house.
Mm.
And so I mean, it was just rich and wonderful. Elizabeth, you've mentioned a couple times, and I've been not getting back to that. She's the other main point of view character in the book, and she's a young French woman who came from France when she was 12. She's lived exactly half her life in the United States and has a very close-knit relationship with her parents. She goes to work for the Bell Company, selling graphophones, which were pre-phonograph, pre-gramophone devices that played wax cylinders. And this was basically the recording medium prior to the phonograph record. And so she's been hired to sell them into the homes of the Boston Brahmin class, the very, rich Bostonians. And in doing that, she encounters the Sanborns and forms an unlikely friendship with Helen Sanborn, who is the young, ingenue daughter of the Sanborn family and was my grandmother. Uh, so Elizabeth and Helen are kind of the nerve center of the historical timeline in the book.
That's really lovely that you got to include your grandmother in the story. And it's a really, um, yeah, it just sounds like a really lovely way to think through your family history and experience some of those connections and then get to present that to the world. This book is just such a beautiful little complex machine, and I really loved reading it and sort of taking apart the mystery and experience. I've tried not to talk about the mystery at all so that we don't spoil anything.
Thank you.
Welcome. And I'm wondering, so what is next for you? You've mentioned a CD that's coming out. Are you also writing anything at the moment? Can you talk about those things?
Yes, I'm actually working on 3 novels at the moment, too much.
Wow.
I have one that I wrote years ago before Sonata in Wax was even conceived, and I'm kind of overhauling it. I want to see it published, and so I'm doing some overhauling of it. It's been sitting in a bottom drawer for long enough that I can now go in there and, use my editorial X-Acto knife and be kind of brutal in a way that would have been hard when I was closer to it. So I'm working on that. And over the last year and a half, I've written a new novel, which is sort of a road trip story set mostly in Italy. I've gotten notes back from some beta readers, and I'm digesting all those. And then I've started something new that is, I'll just say, very topical to what's going on in the country right now, which I may not publish under my own name. I'll just, I'll just leave it at that. So pretty busy, and getting the CD done was a huge project. I sort of had this recording contract drop on my head and then had a very short timeline to get all the music finished. And, it's very similar to checklist to what you have when you're publishing a book, cover design, headshots, contents, all of it. So it's been a really busy summer.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of stuff to juggle. So yeah, Godspeed, happy writing. And, I hope it all goes well and that you get to return to talk about your work in the future.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. This is really a lot of fun.
Great. Thank you. All right, listeners, please check out Sonata in Wax. The paperback will be available shortly as of your hearing of this, if you're listening on release day. What was the date that you said for the paperback again?
August 26th.
August 26th. So please head to your favorite bookstore or library website, wherever you like to go for books. Do you have a place you'd like to send people for books?
If they're ordering online, I really love bookshop.org, which is a nonprofit that has any book you would want. But part of their profits go to local independent bookstores. And so depending on where you live, if you don't have an independent bookstore close to you, or you just don't want to leave your desk, you can order anything through bookshop.org and then identify your favorite local independent bookstore as the beneficiary of that revenue share. So I really like to drive people to that. Of course, your local public library, always a good resource. And, just indie bookstores, they really need your support and your help.
Excellent. Strong suggestions, all very, very, very good choices. All right, so you know what your homework is, listeners, and where to go. Thank you for joining us. It's time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.